One of my earliest video game memories was playing the demo for Bungie's Halo Combat Evolved on my dad's computer. It showcased the Silent Cartographer, the fourth level in the game and one of the most iconic moments in the series. Of course, as a kid, the level's brilliant structure went mostly unnoticed. Halo's colorful aliens, cool guns, and wisecracking Marines were thrilling enough. I mean, probably like a lot of people, one thing I vividly remember was Sergeant Johnson's fourth wall-breaking sales pitch players got once they beat the demo.
Halo, you'll find additional vehicles like tanks, plasma turrets, and aircraft. Halo, Combat Evolved. Buy one. Heck, buy two. That's an order, soldier.
As life went on, an appreciation for the level stuck with me, but it was more than a wide-eyed nostalgia. The level's tone, like the level itself, is multi-tiered, and a shining example of how revolutionary Combat Evolved was. It's no coincidence that the level was the demo. It's a great vertical slice of what the game offers, while never truly uncovering the game's depth. After all, the level is set on an isolated island whose only connection to the rest of the game is through an underground tunnel that players literally uncover. But the Silent Cartographer's brilliance begins with the way the level opens, while it subtly hints at the game's grander mystery. Cartographer opens smoothly. The Halo theme kicks in, Cortana delivers exposition, and players are dropped onto an enemy-infested beach. Suffice it to say, the tone is set. But the intro is more manipulative than it appears, and the rest of the level carries that torch. As players fly to the island, they're faced with the horizon, and to the left, players see a section of the ring climbing into the sky. For me, the horizon always established how isolated players are. There aren't any mountains or other islands. Players and the island itself are completely secluded. The ring is a reminder of what players still don't know. Throughout Combat Evolved, the ring is constantly towering over players, and as the story's mystery looms over the player, so too does the ring, which in itself is the game's mystery. It's small, it's subtle, but for players that notice it, it harbors a somewhat sinister intimation. Cortana's dialogue leading us up to the beach may also distract players from the distant sights. Not to say her dialogue is misplaced, I actually think Cortana's line here is great. It's succinct and specific, telling us,
"The Covenant believe that what they call the Silent Cartographer is somewhere under this island. The Cartographer is a map room that will lead us to Halo's control center. The island has multiple structures and installations. One of them contains the map room."
We're approaching the LZ. It's gonna be hot. Get set to come out quickly. Touchdown! Hit it, Marines!
The opening firefight is awesome. The Halo theme is roaring, Marines are screaming orders, aliens are screaming back at you. It's an exhilarating opening that deceptively sets a false tone for the rest of the level. After the skirmish, the same dropship that lands players at the beach, Echo 419, flies in and delivers this line.
All hostiles have been eliminated. Affirmative. Echo 419 inbound. Somebody order a warthog.
Hey, I didn't know you made house calls for Hammer.
You know our motto. We deliver.
I love this line. It paints the game's personality and gives the Marines a voice. It's a great example of Combat Evolved's cherished charisma. And it's not the only time the game does something like this. In any case, after driving around and desperately trying to slam into grunts, players get to the first event, the door. The door that leads players to the Silent Cartographer locks, halting players' advance and serving as a prelude for our inevitable confrontation with the shrouded Sangheili zealot that's on the other side. And like the door stops us from moving forward, it also signals a slight change in mood. The adrenaline-soaked beach assault dissolves. Now there's a palatable sense of apprehension. Right next to the door, it's revealed that the island is much bigger than just a few buildings. A sense of unease begins to set in as players literally stare into the unknown. Cortana delivers the news to Captain Keyes, breaking our sudden stroke of silence and getting the story moving. There's a new objective, to find the security override, and it's back to ramming grunts and exploring the island. 3 really fun segments of gameplay follow, 2 battles with hunter teams and an encounter with invisible elites. These encounters actually remind me of something Jamie Griesmer, a designer for Bungie at the time, famously said about Combat Evolved.
In Halo 1, there was maybe 30 seconds of fun that happened over and over and over and over again. So if you can get 30 seconds of fun, you can pretty much stretch that out to be an entire game. Encountering a bunch of guys, melee attacking one of them before they were aware, throwing a grenade into a group of other guys, and then cleaning up the stragglers before they could surround you. And so you can have all the great graphics and all the different characters and lots of different weapons with amazing effects, but if you don't nail that 30 seconds, you're not going to have a great game.
If taken out of context, this well-known quote doesn't fully represent what Griezmer meant, which is to say how Combat Evolved kept things fresh and different. In 2011, Griezmer told Engadget that this 30 seconds was about playing Halo in different environments with different weapons, different vehicles, against different enemies, against different combinations of enemies. No 30-second stretch of Halo is ever repeated. The missions are constantly changing the context on you. And that is exactly what we see here. Players fight hunters in an open area with plenty of room to move and dodge. A minute later, after a firefight or two with some minor enemies, players see hunters again, but this time they're in a small room crowded with Covenant equipment. Movement is tough and players are forced to change their tactics. Now this design philosophy is obviously repeated throughout the game, but this is such a good example that it's hard not to talk about. So once players activate the security override, a quick cutscene plays showing the Zealot run out of the room and the tone goes from a steady decline to a straight drop. The next section of the game is titled It's Quiet. Players get dialogue about a pelican crashing and on their way exiting the room, players run into the Invisible Elites. The Invisible Elites aren't important so much because they're dangerous enemies, but more so because they raise the tension. Seeing a Zealot again evokes thoughts of suspicion and concern. Players think, is it coming after me? When am I gonna see it? And then, as these thoughts are going through players' heads, they're attacked by enemies they can't see. This sequence of events muzzles the mood, which is much darker than it's been at any other point in the mission. And the upcoming bout with the Zealot, whether it be due to excitement or anxiety, sits in the backs of players' minds as they move on. If players follow the intended path, they'll come upon a rocket launcher at a crashed Pelican, and, soon after, another example of the 30 seconds mentality is in full display. Hunters are stationed outside the Cartographer, and once players have defeated this pair of hunters, players would have fought hunters in 3 different environments, and the third encounter was with a new set of weapons. This is game design at the absolute finest, and the level is still far from over. Players' descent to the Cartographer is, like the mission said, quiet. Past the newly unlocked door, the music changes. It's nearly a horror track, and so far the Zealot is nowhere to be found. The path here goes 2 ways. Going left progresses through the mission, but going right triggers this. This scene, one of my personal favorites in video game history, ignited my imagination when I was a kid. The pit is imposing, mysterious, and reminds players how little they know of this universe. And while players stand near the edge of a mystery, the chief stands at a literal edge. Players are now face to face with the unknown, the acknowledgement that there's something more to this game than just aliens and machine guns. Descending even further down, the level becomes completely different. Earlier, we were fighting in the open at medium and long range, but now the combat is close quarters and the rooms are complex, even maze-like. A lot of these rooms have 2 different entrances, and the enemies aren't even ready to fight. The ambience becomes almost meditative while players traverse deeper into the building. It's silent, almost serene, and the whole time players are still wondering where this Zealot is and when they'd have to fight it. It's a tone that's somewhat similar to a slasher fic, where the audience knows the bad guy is somewhere, but doesn't know when they'll strike. I mean, of course, instead of being a mid-20s Drew Barrymore, players are a cyborg killing machine, so there is kind of a big difference. Regardless, once players have found the Cartographer and activated it, Bungie manipulates the mood again. The Halo theme jolts the mood in the opposite direction, back to what it was at the beginning of the level. Players, now finding their way up out of the building, would be forgiven if they forgot that just a moment later they were walking on eggshells, checking every corner. Players fight their way to the top and BAM! Oh geez, don't be a noob next time, Drew! The Zealot is waiting for you, around the corner right at the exit. Now, at lower difficulty levels, the fight isn't all that tough. As long as players go backward and still have that trusty rocket launcher, it'll probably end pretty quick. But think about all the recent changes in tone. You descend, it turns creepy, you escape guns blazing, turn a corner, and the villain that's been teased all level is waiting for you. And just in case you thought it was over, Bungie leaves a few more invisible elites to harass you on the way out. The level is absolutely brilliant. There are different settings, different tones, but the game is always Halo. It stays consistent within the boundaries of how Bungie wanted Combat Evolved to feel. And maybe the most important fact is that it's still really fun. More than a decade later, the physics still feel good, the gunplay still feels good, the sense of awe is still there. And admittedly, some of that might be my nostalgia speaking, but something tells me it's more than that. It's an admiration for an amazing piece of storytelling that is just one part of a grander, more mysterious story altogether.
Let's get moving. Hammer, here are coordinates and a flight plan I've worked out. Cortana, these